What is up, mi gente? Did you miss me? I missed you. It's better late than never. Today's book and blush is gonna feature my March reads. I have a pretty mixed bag from last month. We're gonna break them down. I'm not gonna give any spoilers, so don't worry, especially because 2 books I read are part of a series and there might be a little controversy there. I put out a little poll and I asked you guys what you want me to bring back because you like to see what special drink I bring in each video. And guess what? Boba won. So today I have boba milk tea, going back to the roots, to that very first proper bookish video I made. So let's just open this up and shake. In case you're wondering, I just got the original milk boba and it's so freaking good. I have a bunch of fun new products that are still in their box that I can't wait to try today. And I'm gonna go a little bit more fancy schmancy. So like I mentioned, March was a mixed bag, but I also read a little bit less than usual. I think I made a total of 7 books and I feel like usually I hit 9. It's less than normal, but also if you compare it to normal people unlike us, book crazy people, 7 books is still a lot, okay? I'm just gonna get some good old handy dandy tape. So if you see a glare, that's why. I'm actually going to start with Cruel Illusions. It is a very YA book. I thought it sounded really interesting though because it focuses on magicians that are also vampire hunters, and I just haven't seen that mix before. Plus the cover was really beautiful, I'm not gonna lie, and it's one of the books I found at the world's biggest bookstore. I made a video on that and featured it in there as well. I feel like if I had read this book early on in my reading journey, I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more, but because I've read better storylines that are more action-packed, drama-packed, where the writing is just stunning and it's an incredible story, this kind of fell flat, but it was still pretty entertaining. Just when the author was about to lose me in some parts, the author reeled me back in. The author added some betrayals or characters that you didn't expect would come back up. The MC herself wasn't the most interesting MC. She was pretty naive, but I did love that it featured a kiddo that's in the foster system. So her parents passed away when she was really young, and she knows that her mother didn't just die, that her mother was actually killed by a vampire. And so for our MC Ava, she did see the way her mom was killed, and it really lined up with how she heard vampires hunt and everything. But her younger brother is more assimilated in with their new family and everything, and so it's really hard for her to carry this on her own. And so she starts secretly training as much as possible, which is pretty funny because she uses movies, and I'm like, I can't even judge this MC because it's basically me with John Wick, you know? I just watch it and I think I'm ready to be the greatest assassin of all time. So she watches all these movies and learns all these moves and stakes and everything until she runs into this really strange kind of carnival magic show thing, and she soon feels that this is the real deal. This isn't just like some fake little cute magic show where they pull a bunny out. And of course we meet a love interest where I was just sus from the beginning. Every year there's a competition where you can basically join a group if you make it through the competition and become an apprentice, and then you can also hunt vampires, which is what our MC wanted. She's 18, she can do what she wants now. She decides to join them and join this competition, which is a pretty bad idea because she's literally never been trained, and the competition is in 2 days. It actually takes place in Santa Cruz out of all places, which I just think is so funny because I attended school at Santa Cruz and it's the most beachy, chill town ever. So it's just so funny to picture this is the hunting grounds for vampires, one of the most popular places, and where our magicians go to this tournament. So imagine that. Surfing USA, good vibes. I guess they don't live in Forks, Washington. I was expecting more action, more violence, more drama, but that wasn't the case. So this was my least favorite book of the month, and really I feel like giving it like 2.75, rounded up to 3 stars. The next book was actually an ARC, but it was released last month and it's called My Dear Henry. And this is for all of you true Hyde and Jekyll fans. If you don't know Hyde and Jekyll, it's that classic story of this scientist that basically makes himself into two, this beast and this good person. He wants to take out the evil out of him. And there are a lot of retellings of this story. One of my favorites was actually in the show Once Upon a Time. I know it's a little off topic, but that one was pretty fun, especially because I love the actor that played Hyde. So My Dear Henry is actually a timepiece. It's also LGBTQ. This book is super gothic. It's very atmospheric. It's like perfect for those gothy rainy days, which my city seems to always be pretty freaking gothy and rainy. This story was actually really sweet. I enjoyed the writing so much because this author really made me feel like I was in that time period. I was experiencing the streets, the weather, even the smell. I just felt like this author really tapped into all the senses. We follow Gabriel, who is trying to be basically a doctor, like a scientist doctor, because his father wants him to. Slavery was abolished because I think this takes place like in the 1700s, 1800s. So slavery had been abolished for a while, but that doesn't mean that racism was just gone. And our MCs are black, you know, they're black young men, and they want to be a part of the scientific society and everything. Gabriel was basically taught that if he keeps his head down, if he does what he needs to do, he'll make it. There's usually these schools of thought where violence is necessary and you can't just be compliant. And then there's that other way of thinking where just do as you're told, follow the rules, get in, and eventually you'll break all of these racist barriers. And so Gabriel's dad is from that school of thought where he should just do his best, be quiet, do as he's told. It's pretty frustrating to read. I'm not gonna lie. It's frustrating to read because Gabriel clearly has way more to say, but he thinks a lot about his father and how his father worked so hard to get him a place in this school and in this boarding house, and he doesn't want to ruin those things, right? And in comes this love interest, best friend, Henry. And so the title is My Dear Henry because guess what? They write each other these beautiful letters and really get to know each other. I really liked reading the journey they had. Boba break. But Henry is not like Gabriel, and that's because his father is a scientist within the school. And even though he's treated really bad, like thrown in a corner, his work gets stolen, his father still fights back, and he is way more aggressive than, for example, Gabriel's father. Now Henry loves his father and respects him a lot because his father is also working really hard to get Henry his spot. This story does pick up pretty quick because they meet, they have a summer, they write letters to each other during that summer, and then they come back and they're basically together. Now of course they can't be openly together, but Gabriel's not really great at hiding this. He thinks it's just fine if they spend all this time together. Henry does not. He's not okay with this, and I think as a reader you can tell pretty quickly that his father is really the one that's not okay with this. Dark things start to happen. The father gets fired for stealing, except is he really stealing or is someone just saying he's stealing because they've had it out for him for a while? As for Henry, he also ends up disappearing, and Gabriel literally never hears from him again, which is concerning because they did write all these letters to each other, but he knows that Henry isn't really ready to be open about who he is or what he feels despite Gabriel's encouragement and support. And this is where our story really picks up. The journey with Gabriel as he tries to figure out what's happening until one day he meets this new mysterious character named Hyde. Hyde seems to be a part of the Jekyll home. Henry's trying to figure out who exactly Hyde is, why he's so close to this family. Could he be maybe an illegitimate son or Henry's new lover? That's where the story continues. And again, I really like the writing. I really liked the period it was set. This author is pretty well known for all of these other books, but I think this is her first time period or like one of two, and I just think she should definitely keep writing these time period pieces because she really drags you into that atmosphere and it feels really cool. It's just really good. She did lose me a little bit toward the end, and again, no spoilers, so we're not doing spoilers here, but I just want to say that the ending did feel a little bit rushed. I wanted more time with these these characters with the complex themes. I really love the themes in this book of love and self-acceptance and acceptance from your family and fear. Just the ending was unfortunately a little bit, but I still recommend this book. And so I ended up giving this book a 3.5/3, I believe. I think I may have gone out of order a little bit here. I'm gonna go a little out of order here just because I rated this series differently. Like the second book to me wasn't as great as the first one, which is pretty, I know it might be a little controversial because a lot of people feel the opposite, but we'll get into that whole thing. I read Once Upon a Broken Heart last month and I surprisingly enjoyed it so much that I read The Ballad of Never After. So I did rate The Ballad of Never After lower. That's why it's earlier on this list, since we're going from my least to my most favorite. I can't wait to talk about my most favorite. It was so freaking good and I'm just gonna try to convince all of you to read it. Anyways, you know, maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't, but I would be surprised if you haven't heard of the Caraval series. That series is written by Stephanie Garber, who I know is like our modern day fairy tale author, you know, really blew up after Caraval. Ooh. I did read that first book. I really liked it. The other two were a mess. I just was not a fan. I was really upset with the way she would build up these awesome plot lines because Garber definitely has so much imagination, really great twists and turns and weaving of stories. But I think sometimes she fails to really complete or connect that mind-blowing build-up. I feel like her writing has this tendency to just wash it all away. Like something happens and suddenly none of that matters anymore. You know, the plotting, the scheming, this build-up suddenly goes out the window because guess what? Everything's found out and it doesn't even matter anymore. And that's kind of what she did in book 2. I got so many answers to so many questions. Jack's story, who's a very popular character in the Caraval series. Stephanie Garber did not think he would be this freaking popular, that people would love him so much. He was meant to be just this side character, this villain. You don't really have to read Caraval to read Once Upon a Broken Heart, but there are some people that say the world building lacks a little bit. I think it's because it builds off of Caraval so much. I can't tell you to read these 3 books first before you read these other 2 books, but at the same time our main character is going through things and is the way he is because of what happened in Caraval. And then Caraval also sets the stage for the entire world and how it's built and the magic system and the fates. We do get completely new characters in the spin-off series, but still, do with that what you will. I'm going to try a new concealer. If I end up super light, don't make fun of me. So like I said, I was super curious. It was a bit repetitive though, I have to say. The main character, Evangeline, I actually really liked her as an MC versus Tella. I did not like Tella as an MC, so I didn't enjoy Legendary or Finale as much. I did enjoy Evangeline because she does see her faults and she does still make the same mistakes anyway, but she is entertaining and a character that tries to do her best. Garber was really weaving this beautiful lore and story behind Jax and everything, only for her to pull like a telenovela move at the end of this book and basically throw everything out the window, which was so upsetting because why are you gonna build up so much plot and storyline for one tiny thing to just throw everything out? What was the point of all of that? I feel like the ending had 3 endings. I thought we had the actual ending, which I was gonna fling myself off of a building and cry that Garber would leave me with that cliffhanger, only for it to continue and then continue again. I was very underwhelmed. I went through that whole hot mess for what? Why? That's one of my main critiques with this author. That's why I'm rating it a little bit lower. People said I would love the second book even more than the first. I cannot get over a bad ending, you know? Like I've said this before, like with Addie LaRue. The book was not paced very well in my opinion and dull, but the ending was so good and moved me, and it just, I hated that because it meant my rating wanted to change drastically from being a very low rated book to like going 2 stars higher. It was just so good and I had to figure out how do I balance that, because I think endings are so important. If you're gonna take your readers through a really long journey, the ending has to be like worth it. I don't know how to explain. Hopefully you get me. Also, what is this concealer? What is it concealing? More concealer to conceal my disappointment. For this reason, I did end up giving this book 3 stars, also maybe 3.5 stars. I don't know. My next book is actually an adult contemporary, I guess it would be called, literary fiction. I don't know. I'm getting into all of these genres, but it's called Alone with You in the Ether. And maybe you've read it or heard about it because it blew up again. And the author recently blew up because this is the same author that also wrote The Atlas Six, you know, which is also a very popular YA. And so this book was republished even though it was written a while ago, and it was highly recommended to me, so I really wanted to try it. Now this book focuses on some pretty heavy topics, but I actually really like that. Our MCs have really severe mental health issues. One has bipolar disorder, and this is said in the book, and our other MC seems to be just severely clinically depressed and has some type of OCD, I think, like some obsessive thinker. That looks better. All this to say, our characters are not our typical MCs. They don't do the best things, especially our female character Regan. I do have to say, so in this book, Regan does go through this really difficult period where she just doesn't feel like herself on her meds. And I have to be a little delicate when I say this or when I explain this book, because in no way did I feel like this book was promoting anti-medication or saying that medication harms people and, you know, people shouldn't be put on it or anything like that. I did not feel like the author was saying these things at all. And you would have to read it to really understand why I felt this way, because the character is literally moving without meds and going through these huge waves. But I did not feel this way, and I bring it up because I did notice some reviews saying they felt like this is what the author was saying. If anything, I felt like the author was saying that it's different for everybody, that you could have the same diagnosis but it's very different for everyone, that medication isn't bad, that you do need it, but that some people who are struggling with their mental health or a certain diagnosis, maybe they need something else. And this is backed up by her gorgeous note at the end, because this author also has BPD, and she went through something that her main character Regan went through in the book, where she just didn't feel like herself. She one day forgot to use her meds, felt drastically better, but still had a therapist following her, checking in on her. She made a deal with her therapist that if she still needs those meds, the therapist will make the call and she has to take the meds. And we're talking about the author here. And so she makes it very clear in her note that she doesn't hate medicine. She doesn't think it's some evil thing. This is just one of the journeys that she went through, that her character also goes through. I just want to put that out there because, again, these are very real themes, the very real topics, things that happen. And I think it's important to hear the people that go through it experience this. And I did see some reviews where other people said they also have BPD or OCD and they could not be okay without their medicine and they really hated this book. That's totally fine. But for me, I really didn't think she was promoting this, and she backed that up in the author's note. So moving on, what I love the most is that this is a love story. So what happens when two really broken characters come together? Can they still love? Are they still allowed to have a relationship? That's really the theme of this book, and that's really the story we focus on more than just their mental health journey. The mental health journey is going to be automatically a part of this because it's a part of them, and they're together and they both have these severe diagnoses. But I think it was really beautiful, very real, also a little bit encouraging, because I think oftentimes we think we have to be these like perfect people or, you know, have everything figured out before we can join someone. And I think that, you know, you definitely have to work on yourself and better yourself before you welcome someone else in. And maybe that means not having a relationship for a long time, but you also can't wait until you're absolutely perfect, because sometimes you can't do it alone. And so Regan meets this character Aldo, who doesn't treat her the way her long-term boyfriend treats her, doesn't belittle her or not take her seriously because, oh, Regan's just having one of those days. And I just loved reading Regan's point of view on that. I think that's what made her character real. There's also this beautiful church scene I think is the most, it's so funny saying this, but intense hand holding I've ever read in any book, and it's so beautiful. And you would think the kiss, or you know, their first time or whatever, would be the more romantic, closeness, vulnerable part, but this author wrote the most beautiful hand holding scene. I kid you not, it was so deep. It was better than some of these other romance novels. I love the character Aldo. He's definitely a favorite of mine. Overall, I really enjoyed the story. It did lose me in the middle a little bit, but I think that's because Regan was not my favorite MC. I learned a lot from her, but I also felt like a little overwhelmed. Let me breathe a little bit. The ending really got to me, but also the author's note really got to me. Just hearing her story, her intentions, a little bit of her journey, and what this book really means really got to me. I'm giving this book more of a 3.5, 3.75. I don't know if I would read it again, just because, again, when we focus more on Regan than Aldo, it lost me a little bit in the, you know, middle part of the book. Definitely a very interesting read. Now we're going to one of my blind dates with a blind date with a book. It's called Beach Trip. It feels a lot like The Parent Trap. It's basically these two girls that become really good friends in this summer camp. Sound familiar? And they find out they're actually half sisters. Yeah, their dad was hella messing out here with Blake's mom. Natalie finds out her best friend is actually her half sister, and it was honestly a really heartbreaking first scene, because literally right in the beginning of the book, Blake lost her mom, and she's just been waiting for her dad to come pick her up, because clearly he would know, right? Like, my mom passed away and I'm just left here with my grandparents, but he's still my parent, like he'll come back for me, right? Wrong. And when he does come to pick up Natalie, his daughter, because her grandfather just died and it's a family emergency, they have to go, he sees Blake right there, right in front of him, recognizes her, says her name, and still leaves her there. I was so pissed, you guys. I was so freaking this dad was the worst. He was the absolute worst. And then to make things even worse, Natalie also abandoned Blake, thinking for whatever reason that Blake was plotting this all along and wanted to steal her dad and wanted to ruin her family. She's 12. Like, I guess you have these selfish thoughts when you're young, not realizing Blake is also a little girl herself who was literally abandoned by her father twice, and not because he didn't know she existed. Fast forward like 10 or 15 years, the freaking worst dad of the year dies, and he leaves them a beach house, both of them. Why he decided this, I have no idea. Natalie's really upset because she's sentimentally attached to this house. Blake, however, needs money and wants to sell this house to take care of her grandfather who has Alzheimer's, right? If you don't like the whole like princess influencer trope, I would say this is not for you, because Natalie was pretty freaking annoying. I was not rooting for her at all. She was the worst, so selfish, so annoying. So now they're stuck in this summer together because they're trying to remodel. They can't sell the house unless they both agree to it, and of course Natalie doesn't agree to this. So she's trying to find a way to buy the house from Blake so that she's the full owner of this house. And Blake doesn't care. Blake's like, yeah, you're loaded, like you can buy this house, I need the money, I'm trying to take care of my granddad, go ahead. Except Blake doesn't know that the dad was his typical liar self. He pretended that they were good and they had all this money, but he left them completely broke. There's these romances in there, there's this whole journey, and I don't know how the author ended up making me laugh and like change my mind over time, because I swear I was so pissed at the first like 20% of this book. I didn't even know if I could finish it. I just felt so hard because, again, these things do happen, and I was just so upset for Blake. I just thought it was so unfair, and the way she was feeling unwanted and abandoned, and the way Natalie would literally say that to her, that she was unwanted and that the dad picked her over Blake and her mom. I got through it, and I think that was the 4th book in my physical TBR I finished, so I'm pretty proud of that, because remember, we're trying to bring that sucker down. In the end, I laughed, I got sentimental, it was sweet. The book was warm and fuzzy at the end of the day, so it was a very different read because I'm used to violence and dystopianness, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. I think I binged it all in like a day or a day and a half. Now we're back to Once Upon a Broken Heart, which was the first first book, that first book was solid. I didn't like the rest of Caraval's series, but when I started Once Upon a Broken Heart, it actually caught me. I think I was just in the mood for a book like that, for a good storyline like that, for more fantasy and fairy tale. Evangeline was a great MC to follow. Of course, we have Jax, the dark-haired, light eyes, witty. We all basically ship Jack with anyone. This book basically starts around Caraval before Legendary, and there's this whole gap that happens because of Evangeline's action. Evangeline goes to the Prince of Hearts because she wants to marry the love of her life, and she asks him to please stop this wedding and break that curse. And in exchange, Jax, the Prince of Hearts, shows up and asks for 3 kisses anytime to anyone, any place from Evangeline. She agrees, and things go very, very wrong because this fate is not kind. He's not loving. And so there's this time jump that happens, and when that time jump happens, it's after all of the events that happened in Legendary and finale. And so that was really important because I was a little bit confused. Jax just seemed different, and I know what happens to him in the Caraval book, so I was just wondering. Now this one was really interesting because Evangeline takes us to a different part of the Caraval world. If you do read this one and you don't read Caraval, you will get spoilers. I really loved all the fairy tales. Again, Garber does a great job at making this world, and the main thing I really love, we hear fairy tales all the time, but in this case, in this region, these fairy tales are a part of their actual history. It's not just fake, it's not fiction, but these stories are cursed. And so every time someone repeats a story or tells the story, they forget a piece of that story and it changes. And I think that's a really clever, like, magical system and way of storytelling, because as much as they try to remember, or if you grab a book about a certain fairy tale and you open it, the book will shift, will change. There's this general gist of it, but really important details end up changing a lot. And so that was one of my favorite things. Evangeline's mom was from this world, and so that's why she knows a lot about it. But again, I really like that first book, kind of like Caraval. You know, she won me over. The MC was great. Garber put in so much work, so many plot lines, and moved so much. There's mystery in there. You want to know even more about Jax and his real intentions and his history and what's going on and how does Evangeline have a role in this. But unlike the second book, Garber doesn't just completely unravel all of that beautiful, intricate work. Let's just set this real quick. I do recommend this. I do really like it. Even if I was disappointed by the ending in the second book, I am going to continue and read the third book. But for Once Upon a Broken Heart, I do rate it 4 stars. I missed this world. I missed Garber's more intentional writing. It was so good and I really liked it. Now for my top book that I'm going to do everything in my power to convince you to read. It's called Red Rising. Red Rising was gifted to me a few years ago for Christmas. Just been sitting there since. I've heard great things about it. I didn't pick it up, and I have this little book club and we decided to pick this up. This book was so freaking good. Listen. If sci-fi isn't your jam, you still need to read this book. This book is the most sci-fi book I've read up to date. The themes, the MC, the songs, it was so good. I could not stop reading this book, and I'm so happy I paired it with the audiobook because the songs they have at the end of the audiobook, so you can fully listen to what the song would actually be like, and it was freaking beautiful. Okay, here's the main reason I think you should read this book. Not only is it an amazing plot line, but it's not written like your stereotypical old school sci-fi books. Maybe you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe you do, but I feel like sometimes some sci-fi books are very dense and a little dry. Not to offend some of my sci-fi lovers out there, I clearly like sci-fi, okay? I'm just saying some books are a little bit overly complicated for no real reason. The wording is not very friendly to everybody, and this does not read that way. It's pretty fast. It is so good. So on to the actual book. We follow Darrow in this book, and he is one of the best MCs. I loved reading his point of view. He is complicated. He makes mistakes. He's not arrogant, but he is filled with so much anger that causes him to make so many mistakes, but he's such such a freaking smart character, and I love that. I feel like your MC can really make or break. Sometimes I've read some stories like ACOTAR where the MC is not my favorite, and it sucks because the world is actually really interesting, right? So we're in this world which is basically like we're out in space. There was these whole wars between the US and like parts of Europe and Africa and all of these things, and basically Earth went to crap, and they sent people out to Mars, to Jupiter, to Venus to basically mine and fix things up so that people could live out again. Sounds familiar? People are split into colors. You have reds, you have golds, you have obsidians, and basically reds are slaves. Okay, we're just gonna call it what it is. They're slaves. They work on Mars. They're meant to mine for fuel and all this stuff to help, you know, rebuild Earth and make their land habitable. And they live basically kind of like an underground Mars. Little do they know that the golds, and I mean, they know they're under, you know, the gold's foot, the world was habitable like years, decades ago. It was fine, but no one wanted to let the reds go. They still need slaves basically to keep the world running. And so no one ever told these reds. This book has a mix of like Hunger Games, you know, when Katniss goes to the Capitol and realizes how good they're eating and all of that poverty they're suffering is really unnecessary. This is what Darrow experiences when all these tragic events early on in the book happen. I'm not going to spoil that for you. It's very dystopian. And so now there's this plot where Darrow is going to be transformed into a gold because their appearances are very different. Their emblem on their arms are different, and he goes through this excruciating, painful transformation to become a gold, just basically manufactured, which is what humans ended up doing. Again, sounds very familiar. Changing themselves into the perfect being, all this surgery on their bodies to make themselves taller, stronger, faster, more attractive, whatever it is. Darrow is going through this process because there's a rebellion happening. Unlike YA kind of feels like rebellion can just happen overnight, Darrow has a pretty long journey ahead of him. He has to make it to a pretty high status to have his own fleet, like basically become a general in order to fight and have a fighting chance to free the reds and make the world more equal again. And in order to do that, he has to go through an academy. He has to earn an apprenticeship. He has to earn a house that will sponsor him. Then he has to work his way up to a position where he can have his own fleet and he's not just this political bureaucrat. And so I was really surprised. I was like, okay, we're gonna have to journey. This isn't just like book one and bam, we're in war and then we win. Darrow's gonna have to go through this. All right, my camera died, but we're back. A little warning, around 60%-ish, it's very Lord of the Flies. You'll see why. There's this whole plot with the academy, but it got even better. I was gasping. My notes on Goodreads, if you follow me on Goodreads, and you know, you can see my updates there, I put gasps in Spanish at the end. It's definitely a more violent book. It makes you question, like, is there a necessity of violence? A little bit like Babel. Really good themes in a really good story, and I can't wait to read the second one. I patiently waited to meet with my book club to talk about this, to see if they would want to read the second book before starting the second book. So I'm gonna start the second book. I talked about this early on Bookstagram just because I couldn't hop on here to make a video, and I was really surprised that my DMs were more flooded than usual with people asking if I really recommend this book and if it was actually that good, and I said yes. I was really happy that non-sci-fi readers actually picked this book up, but I was really happy that they all really liked it, and so it got high ratings from them too. They were happy I warned them about that little slow-ish part in the middle of the book. I was torn between giving it 5 stars or not. I don't know what the hesitation is. Maybe it is that little slow part that makes me second guess, and I, you know, lean more towards 4.5. It was just so good though, and I think there's 7 books total, but for this series it's 3 books. I heard if you finish the 3, it completes it perfectly. You feel satisfied with everything, and there's a time jump, and then we go on to the next books, which Pierce Brown, the author, is still currently writing to this day. By the way, I'm really glad you guys picked boba as a drink because for some reason it's just really hitting the spot right now. I did get a few specific drinks as requests. So if there is a drink you really want me to try, like someone wants me to try a chai tea latte, 2 other people recommended specific Dutch Bros drinks that I will feature in videos soon, please let me know down below, comment or DM me over on Instagram what drink you want me to try. It will be my drink for that video. And let me try your favorite. Bum, bum, bum. I'm so happy to have hung out with you all. I love this series, Books and Blush. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit subscribe, like, comment, do all of that good stuff. That really helps out this channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.